I want to begin by asking you, what kind of pets do you have? What do you have?
A cat and a dog.
A cat and a dog. What? A kitten. Dog. You have a kitten? Good. All right.
Dog.
A dog?
Two cats and a dog.
2 cats and a dog? Okay, well, I want to tell you about 2 cats that I know about. And these 2 cats, the one on the left is Nico. Nico is from Charlotte. He was running around downtown, and he was just a kitten, and this woman started feeding him, and my son John decided he wanted a cat, so he went and talked to her, and she said, I have just the kitten for you. And so John has Nico, and Nico is now down in Florida. And next to him is Cole. Cole is my son Jim's cat now. He was a cat to Lynn's sister Diane, and Jim takes care of him now. Nico likes to chase Cole. And Cole doesn't like to be chased, and so they're having a few little bitty adjustment areas. I've had cats, but I also have a dog. Anybody know who that is? Who is it? Charlie, of course, I have to talk about Charlie. Charlie is something very fun for me. And we have 2 cats that live in the neighborhood. Can you see them? And these 2 kittens are cats. The black one is called Raven, and the other one has a funny name, Paul. And Paul and Raven are the only 2 cats that Charlie can stand. He wants to chase Nico when he comes to visit. He's never met Cole, but he loves to chase Nico, and Nico does not like to be chased, and I think maybe that's why he chases Cole, because it's just kind of in his blood. Some people have birds, and, you need to see the bird. That looks kind of fun, doesn't it, to have a bird and a dog that like to get together and have fun together. And when I was about your age, we raised some quail, because my dad got a deal with somebody, with the conservation club or whatever, and they had him raise a whole bunch of quail. And that was kind of fun to see those little bitty birds, and then we turned them loose on the farm. Do any of you have a fish? You have a fish too? Okay, so we're hitting just about all of them. We've had fishes in my life, but they don't talk back to me. I got to tell you a story. And this story revolves around a horse and a sheep. My sister, when she was in high school, was beautiful. She even won a beauty contest in the school where we went. And our neighbor man, young man, unmarried, decided that he wanted to be Frances' special friend. So he heard that she liked horses, so he went to the animal auction and bought her a horse that was almost as big as the one in this picture. It wasn't a Clydesdale, but it had feet that were almost as big as a dinner plate. And he brought that horse over to her and said, I have a horse for you. And when my dad got home, the horse went home. Because my dad said, no horse like that. It wasn't even a riding horse. And so he thought, well, we'll go from something big to something little. And so he bought her a lamb. And so the lamb came to live with us, and we had a problem because the dogs kept chasing the lamb, and the lamb didn't know what to do, so he wasn't very long for living on our farm. And then my dad, this guy said, 3rd time's charm, I'm going to buy her a goat. He bought her a goat. Now, my dad said, what am I going to do? What are we going to do with a goat? It's a billy goat. So guess what we named him? Billy. So he became Billy Goat. Billy Goat had little horns, And I had fun playing with him. He didn't like dogs. And so when the dogs came around, what do you think he did? You got it. He would headbutt those dogs, and those dogs would run. And I couldn't keep him in the pasture with our cow. And I was talking to Dad about it. What am I going to do? And Dad said, there is only one way you can keep a goat from climbing a fence or jumping over it. I said, okay, tell me and I'll do it. He said, you take the fence down and let him walk out. That's the only way you can keep a goat in. Now, if you remember, we used to have some church members here that had some goats. And
I just went on my head.
Yeah, with his head. And so these people had some goats. Well, I got to tell you, it wasn't too long until that goat left the farm too. So maybe, would you like to know the rest of the story? Why did the goat leave? Well, I saw that the goat liked to headbutt the dogs, and so I began to tease him until he headbutted me. And I thought that was so much fun. I would get a hold of his horns if he wasn't paying attention, and I would wiggle the horns, and he would butt me. And I had fun with that until one day my dad was working on the tractor. And he was doing some things with a wrench, and he dropped the wrench on the ground. And he bent over to pick up the wrench. And Billy said, this is my chance. And kersmack! Down went my dad. There went his tools. And there went the goat. There's a Bible verse in Numbers 32:23 that says, be sure your sins will find you out. And my sins found me out for teasing that goat and teaching it to headbutt, and it ended up going somewhere else. And Dad let that man know, don't buy anything else for my daughter. You can go back to your seats now.
The theme of the Bible is Jesus and how he died to save men. The plan of salvation assures us he's coming back again. Are you ready for Jesus to come? Are you ready to stand in your place? Have you fought a good fight? Have you stood for the right?
I'm lost.
All right, let's start right here. Let's start right here. Are you ready for chance in your place? You want to start over?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
The theme of the Bible is Jesus and how he died to save men. The plan of salvation assures us he's coming back again. Are you ready for Jesus to come? Are you faithful in all that you do? Have you fought a good fight? Have you stood for the right? Have others seen Jesus in you? Are you ready to stand in your place? Are you ready to look in his face? Can you look up and say, "This is my God"? Are you ready for Jesus to come? Don't cling to the world and its treasures. This worth will soon pass away. Oh, give him your love without measure. He's calling you today. Are you ready for Jesus to come? Are you faithful in all that you do? Dare you fight a good fight? Do you stand for the right? Can others see Jesus in you? Are you ready to stand in your place? Are you ready to look in his face? Can you look up and say, "This is my Lord"? Are you ready for Jesus to come?
I'm going to guess that those of us with gray hair don't have to guess where this sermon title came from. Paul Harvey was not a Seventh-day Adventist, but he attended a Seventh-day Adventist church quite regularly, and even in his broadcast, he quoted Ellen White many times. The favorite part of his story, his broadcast every day around noon. How many have tried to listen to him every day that you could? I see a lot of hands here. I loved his last little thing. He would tell a story about something you thought you knew all about, and then he would say the rest of the story. And then when he got through, he would say, "Now you know the rest of the story." With that phrase in mind, I wanted to spend some time looking at some Bible stories, and let's see if we can find a rest of the story or not. Maybe we won't. Go to 2 Kings chapter 5, and this is probably my favorite story in the Old Testament, or one of my favorite stories. I preached about this young girl here, I don't know, some time back. We've got new visitors, so I'm not going to preach a sermon on just that one. We're going to look at 3 different stories in the Bible. But in this story, we've got this general. I'm going to call him a general. The Bible calls him a commander, but I'm going to call him a general. General Naaman led the Syrian army, and he attacked the land of Israel. And in his attacking the land of Israel, he brought back a young girl and made her a slave to his wife. I've never had a girl, I've had boys. But I can tell you this, I would have fought to the death for my boys. And I would imagine those of you that have girls would fight to the death for your girls, no matter what. And so my guess is that this man or his men killed her parents. and took her and made her a slave. And the story could end there, but it doesn't. The story continues because Naaman contracted leprosy. And leprosy was a fatal disease. When this little girl came into the home, she didn't carry resentment that you would expect her to carry with her parents being gone, perhaps gone. But in some ways, this story is a testament to her parents as much as to her, because they taught her about the God of heaven. They taught her about respect for people, respect for the prophets, respect for the leaders. And she was taught all of these things. And when she saw that her master was going to have with leprosy, it was fatal. The doctor said, Naaman, get your house in order. You're going to die. No one had ever recovered from a full-blown case of leprosy. But this little girl, she was bold. She went to her mistress, and when she came to her mistress, she said, one day she said to her, the Good News Bible, one day she said to her mistress, I wish that my master could go to the prophet who lives in Samaria. He would cure him of disease. Unbelievable. Now, I'm not sure the exact date of the time of Naaman, but it was a long time ago. No one had ever been healed, and no one would be healed of leprosy until when? From the Bible, do we have somebody being healed? The time of Jesus. And then after the time of Jesus, no one was healed of leprosy for a long, long time. It wasn't until 1873, when this Norwegian by the name of Hansen, he discovered and studied this out, and he said leprosy is caused by a bacterium. And then, that was 1873. It still took them till 1940 before they were able to have an effective treatment for leprosy. So here we've got this little girl saying to her mistress and also to Naaman, if you go see this prophet, he will cure you of leprosy. Never happened before and didn't happen again until 1940. Unbelievable. And then when he gets to the place where he would like to get some help, the prophet wouldn't even come out and talk to him. The prophet stayed inside and said, go tell him to go bathe in the Jordan River 7 times. Have you ever seen a picture of the Jordan River? You know that song? How does that song go, Sim? Those songs talk about the Jordan River being, it's probably not much wider than this room at the most. It's muddy. It's not very clean like the rivers I've seen in Alaska, probably a little warmer than them too. But he had to go bathe in that water. He argued with his servant girl or servant man with him, and finally in the end, he went in. And he came out with skin as soft and smooth as a baby's skin. Now, there's more to this story that we won't have time to go into today about Gehazi, the servant, and the scold and all of that. 2 things I really liked about the story. At the end, he goes to the prophet, and he says to the prophet, look, I got a problem. Would you let me take back this bushel basket of your dirt? Because when I get home, I want to put that dirt inside a box, and when I pray to your God, I want to get on Israelite soil. The guy needs a Bible study badly. That God is universal, and he doesn't need to be worshiped just on the soil of Israel. And then he said something else. He said, And I want you to know that when I go into the worship with the king, I'm his right-hand man, and when he bows down, he's on my arm, I got to bow down too. Would you tell your God that I'm not really bowing down to the God, I'm just doing my job? He needed another Bible study, and he needed it bad, that he shouldn't have the appearance of evil or anything. But I love what the prophet said. The prophet said what? Go in peace. That's the end of the story. We don't have the rest of the story. Now, I have done some writing. I wrote a book, and I didn't even tell you the title, and I told one of the stories, and somebody sitting up here on my right came to me and said, "Where did you get that story?" And I said, "It happened to me." "Then did you write that book?" And she's read my stories, and so sometimes I have to be careful what I say around her, because she'll maybe find that out. I've written several articles, but I don't have anything to add biblically to that story, but I wish I could. If I could write an end to that story, the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say, I would like to say that they adopted that girl as their own child, that she was so special to them that they set her up for the best college education, the best she could, letting her worship her God. Even better, I got another ending, and that other ending is that they swallowed their pride and they went back into the Israelite territory and found her aunt and uncle with cousins and said, "We're going to give you this girl back because she's valuable to us, that we'll let her go because we love her." I can't write it. The Bible doesn't give me the right to write the end of that story. Let's go to the New Testament. Luke, the 15th chapter, verses 11 through 32. Go ahead and turn there. In this story, again, it's one that you're very, very familiar with. It's the story of the prodigal son. What can we glean from this story that we know are facts? First of all, this man must have been very wealthy, because if you read between the lines, you can see that there was a lot involved in the estate. There were servants, that's plural, that means more than one, that they had working for them. They must have had a sizable amount of cash on hand. They had the two boys. One of them may have been a little bit spoiled. Can you see that in the story? Just a little bit selfish. And also you can see in the story, he wanted his dad dead. Because if his dad died, he would get 1/3 of the estate. Twice as much went to, I think it'd be a third, twice went to the oldest, third came. So the Bible says what happened is, the younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." Doesn't that sound like, I can't wait for you to die? Give me my share of the estate. So he divided his property between them. The younger one took what was little was his, and next verse there and says, a few days later, the younger son packed up all his belongings, took a trip to a distant land, and there wasted all of his money on parties and so forth. King James Version says riotous living. Have you got that? Is that what that says, riotous living? And King James Version says wild living, reckless living, and the New American Standard Bible, I think says loose living. But I thought this one spelled it out. He had all of these parties and all of this. He was living the high life. So that must have meant the family was pretty wealthy. But it didn't stay that way with this kid, because he didn't invest in any of the proper things. He invested in his friends on being there with him, with wine, women, and song, until he ran out of money, and he turned to those friends, and those friends turned away from him because he had no money. And all at once he found the very best, the very only job he could get. And what was that? You know what that was to the Jew? Go and look in the book of Leviticus, verses 7 and 8. Moses wrote about this. It says, "And the pig, though it divideth hoof, does not chew the cud. It's unclean for you. You must not eat their meat, or touch their carcass. They are unclean to you." And here he is serving them and eating his lunch from their food. He hit his rock bottom. And he began to think back to what his life was like and how pleasant it was in his father's house. And he began to think, okay, I'm going to go home. And when I get home, I'm going to confess to my father that I have sinned, that I have no rights, that I'm willing to be a servant if you'll just let me go in the bunkhouse with these guys because they eat well, and I'll eat well too. The Message translation, I'm going to finish this section with that. When he was still a long way off, his father saw him, his heart pounding, the father's heart pounding. He ran out, the father who the young man kind of wished would die so he could get the inheritance, and he kissed him. The son started his speech. "Father, I've sinned against God. I've sinned before you. I don't deserve to be called your son ever again." The Message says, but the father wasn't listening. You like that? The father wasn't listening. He was calling to his servants, "Quick, bring a clean set of clothes and dress him. Put the family ring on his finger and his sandals on his feet, and then get the grain-fed heifer and roast it. We're going to feast. We're going to have a wonderful time. My son is here, given up for dead and now alive, given up for lost and now found." And they began to have a wonderful time. I want to suggest to you that there's no one could write a better story describing the love of God than the story of the prodigal son. I could never write anything that beautiful. But that's not the end of the story. The story goes on. The elder brother is out in the fields working. He starts coming home. He's dirty. He's sweaty. He's stinky. He's tired. And when he gets within hearing distance from home, he begins to hear all of the noise. He gets home. He looks at the party going on. Sun has set because he works from daylight till dark. And he grabs a servant who's running in with some fresh wine or some fresh other stuff, and he stops him and said, "What's going on?" "Your brother has come home." "What in the world?" The servant went in and said, "Your oldest boy isn't very happy out there." So Dad goes out to him. "Son, what are you doing here?" "Look how many years I've stayed here serving you, never giving you one moment of grief. But you have thrown a party. You've never thrown a party for me and my friends. This son of yours." Who? His brother. "This son of yours who has thrown away your money on whores shows up, and you go all out for a feast." There's more. The father said, "Son, you don't understand. You were with me all the time, and everything that is mine is yours." Remember, his son already had inherited. "But this is a wonderful time. We had to celebrate. This brother of yours was dead, and he's alive. He was lost, and he was found. What's the rest of the story? We don't know, because that's where Jesus left off. Now, if I could write this story and write an ending to this story, I've already got it figured out. This son realizes he's a sinner, realizes he needs Jesus Christ. That's my ending to the story. Kind of like what happened to Peter. Peter was with Jesus. Remember, Peter had denied Jesus how many times? 3 times. And Jesus said to him, "Do you love me, Peter?" right before he goes to heaven. And what does he tell Peter? "Feed my sheep." Not once did he say it, but 3 times he said it. And then Peter breaks down and said, "Lord, you know that I love you. You know everything. I can't do anything more now. You just have to whatever." And Jesus gives him a warning. And he says, "Peter, there'll come a day when somebody else is going to tie your hands and take you where you don't want to go. And you will still follow me." Peter was Peter. He looks around and he sees the Apostle John. Very humanly, he says, "What about him?" Jesus answered, "If I want him to remain until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me." See, if I was writing an ending to that story, I would use Peter's ending here. I would say that he listened to his father, and his father said to him, "Your brother was dead and now is alive, and it doesn't matter where he's been, it's where are you both going?" That's how I'd love to answer that story. And that words to Peter would have sunk into his heart. And he said, it doesn't matter how he lives or how she lives or whatever. How am I living? And where am I going? And the son would have gone in with dirty clothes, with stinky, smelly, all around him, and would have loved his brother too. That's how I'd like to write that story. But I can't. It's unwritten. Paul said, "You must work out your own salvation with fear and trembling" in Philippians 2:12. I can't write that story. That boy had to write that story. Let's go to a new one. John 8, verses 1 through 11. You know that story. We talk about that story often. Certain things I'd like to point out to you, okay? One of the things I want to point out to you, it was morning. And Jesus had just come into the temple. My guess is he had just spent the night in prayer. And here he goes in here, and here come these self-righteous, bigoted hypocrites dragging this woman. Early morning. Early morning. Were they camped outside her room all night waiting for morning? Or did they go in about midnight and catch her in the act and just kept her confined until morning instead of trying to help her through this situation? Early morning, they bring her to Jesus. They cast her at his feet, and they say, Jewish law says it is death by stoning. What do you say? If Jesus said go out and stone her, the Romans would have came after him, and they were ready for that. If he said let her go, then they were all prepared to then call for Jesus being dethroned by the people. I mean, they had Jesus between a rock and a hard place. But you know, you can't put Jesus between a rock and a hard place. One of the most beautiful parts of that story to me is that Jesus leaned over, and the temple floor had not been swept because it was morning. And he began to write. He didn't even act like he heard them. He didn't even pay hardly any attention to him or the woman. He just knelt down and he began writing in the sand. The most important man there, the one who was leading out in that accusations, he goes up and he leans over Jesus' shoulder. What are you writing? And in horror, he withdraws and he disappears. And the other self-righteous people, what did he write? Now, my guess, you can throw this out if you want. My guess is as soon as that man left, Jesus smeared it out. And he started writing again. And here comes this next one. I don't know where he went all at once. And he leans over, and in horror, he looks at what is written in the dust, and he too disappears. One by one, all of the accusers left. I like what my favorite author, Ellen G. White, in Ministry of Healing, page 88, said. There, traced before them, were the guilty secrets of their sins. When he finished, none of the accusers dared show their face for a while. In my imagination, before anyone could see, Jesus had wiped it clean, so only the guilty party saw the sin. Isn't that like Jesus? He's not going to tell you my sins. He's going to tell me. I believe Jesus was trying to communicate. Verse 9, at this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? No one, she said. Then neither do I condemn you. Jesus declared, Go now and leave your life of sin. Okay, we're going to write this story. We're going to put an end to it. There's been an argument for 100 years on who that woman was. Some say that she was Mary Magdalene, the one who washed Jesus' feet. I had a professor that said to me, Mary Magdalene and the woman caught at the water at the well, this woman who had 7 husbands, these women loved. They just didn't know how to do it right until they met Jesus Christ. Another professor said, the reason it's not named as Mary here is because Mary was probably still alive when John was writing, and John didn't want to embarrass her because she had risen to some level where she was really active in the church and people, and so he didn't want to use her name. Was it Mary who was the first one at the resurrection of Jesus Christ? I can't write that story. That story's beyond me. Because professors have argued on both sides of this in my education, in my training. They've argued on both sides. One says it's Mary, another said it's not Mary. And you know what? Neither one of them knows for sure. And I got to tell you, I don't know for sure either. But there has got to be a rest of the story. There's got to be a rest of the story. When I look at all 3 of these stories, there's more to them. And I could give you a whole bunch more, but time's gone. There's a whole lot more of these stories that we don't know, that we can't answer. But there's one thing we can say. How many have sinned? There was sin involved in every one of these stories. I don't clear Naaman for going into the Israelites and stealing that little girl and possibly killing her parents. That's sinful. And I don't buy that. Both boys were sinful. Mary Magdalene, if it wasn't Mary Magdalene, she still had problems. How many devils was cast out of her? Wasn't it 7 devils that Jesus had to cast out of her? And then there's sin involved in all of that. And then the thought comes to me, I can write my story. I can write the rest of my story. I can't write any of those, but I can write the story that Jesus has for me that begins with me recognizing that I am a sinner. And once I recognize I'm a sinner, then I got to make a choice. I got to make a choice. I got to say, am I going to go with Jesus Am I going to let Jesus live within me? Or am I going to just go along with the world and let it go? By the grace of God, I can write my story. Joshua had led the children of Israel. He had led them after Moses had died. He crossed the Jordan with them. He's living with them, and now he's getting ready to die. His final statement to the people. And he says to those people, you know, you can do whatever you want to do. It's your choice. You can go with the Ammonites. You can go with these people. You can do anything you want to do. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. He wrote the end of his story as a warning to you and me. He wrote the end of his story right there. And you can write the end of your story by making a commitment to follow Jesus Christ. Jesus was preaching a sermon about what it was going to be like when Jesus returns. And he says there in Matthew 25, he says, when that day comes, he separated, first of all, by the way, the sheep and the goats. That has a little meaning to me today with the story of the goat and the story of the sheep. He separates the sheep from the goats, and he says of the sheep, come, you blessed of my Father, because you fed me when I was hungry. You did all of these things. Are you familiar with the text? You know, you've done all of those things. You visited me in jail. And they said, when did we do that? And he said, when you did it to the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me. And then the goats said, when did we not feed you? And he said, when you didn't do it to those people. And he ends with these words in verse 46. And these shall go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous unto life eternal. Write your own story. Finish your own story like Joshua. As for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord.
Let's stand together as we sing our closing hymn today, number 606, Once to Every Man a Nation.
To
May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. Amen.